It's the Craig Rugby podcast. It's the midweek podcast prior to the visit of the Stormers to the Sportsground on what looks like it might be a pretty stormy Saturday once again, but we'll talk about that in a little while. On the Zoom call today, I've got Alan Deegan.
How's it going?
And we've got the sports editor from the Galway Advertiser, Linley Mackenzie.
Afternoon all.
Okay, folks, before we talk to Danny and Linley, let's hear some of the highlights of the press conference today where Tom Daly and Andy Friend were talking to William.
Saturday now is a different challenge. You haven't played the Stormers. It's a different challenge for them. They haven't seen the Sportsground when the wind's blowing, which I think it will be. What are you expecting from them? They've been going reasonably well. It's hard to judge. You don't know what's in front of you. Does that excite players or does that make you a bit sort of nervous?
No, yeah, it definitely excites you. It's a completely different challenge, as you said. Like, we're watching their footage and they're playing on rock hard pitches and they're playing this lovely brand of rugby, which, like, as you said there, it might not be that similar weather here on Saturday evening, but I think you can expect from all South African teams they're going to have a massive pack with big ball carriers and really big back row who are good over the ball. That's what we've seen this morning. And then just some really good individuals in the backs. I know one of their wingers, Senatla, he's a former Sevens player. I played against him at under-20s and I remember he was electric back then and he's the same now. And their whole back three just looks very dangerous. Very similar to the Bulls team we played earlier in the year, that kind of big, heavy pack and then really good individuals in the back. So it's just about probably fronting up physically and meeting them head on like we did with the Bulls earlier on in the year and then trying to keep their outside backs quiet by taming their forwards a bit.
Good win Saturday night. What are you expecting this Saturday now? Team you've never played before. They've never seen the Sportsground before. So a few unknowns.
Yeah, a lot of unknowns. We've had a good look, as we do at their previous games. They're a very big physical side, as most South African teams are. So, yeah, very, very strong forward pack. A lot of brilliant individuals in the back line, a lot of Sevens players in that back line. The likes of Ruan Nell and Davids and Senatla and those sort of boys. So we're going to have to be in our game. You can't give them a lot of open space because they'll hurt you. So, expecting a very physical encounter as we do, and a team that can definitely score points if you let them.
Do you think they have a game plan to grind it out if the conditions are difficult, or are they a side that can only go one way, which is to be very open?
Yeah, I reckon that's the great challenge for the South African sides, isn't it? Like they've come into the URC competition and the conditions we play in, especially here at the Sportsground in February, is very different to what they're used to. For them down on the Western Cape. So I reckon that's a great question, and probably more will be revealed at 3:00 on Saturday afternoon, depending upon what sort of weather we give them.
Okay, I think they're still buoyed by that excellent victory at the weekend, Linley. It was great to get the win, especially in the circumstances. Like they had a big lead yet again with 20 minutes to go, and it looked as though they might lose it, especially when that ludicrous red card came about. But they stuck it out, and it could be a huge boost to them for the rest of the season.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that it actually was the first away win this season. I also think it's important to note that it was the first win over the Scarlets in Parky Scarlet since they moved from Stradey Park. And I think, is it something like 11 years? 11 years since they actually beat the Scarlets at home. So I think for those two reasons, it was a huge moment in not just their season, but in their history, actually. It's something that's now off their backs. And every time they went over to the Scarlets, every year it got bigger and bigger and bigger because they'd never won over there. So I think that's a real monkey off their back, so to speak. So absolutely, I think, and for those reasons, it was excellent. Also, it was excellent in the sense that, with 8 matches remaining, they needed to start picking up wins. So that's another one that they can tick off their list. That's the way I see it.
Absolutely. And Danny, it brings them back into giving them a chance to qualify for the Champions Cup again now, because I think we certainly written them off because we haven't won over there, and a lot of people had written this off as a loss. Now they're not that far behind. I suppose the Ospreys are the next team they have to try and catch and pass out.
Yeah, only a couple of points behind the Ospreys. I know there's quite a few games that teams have in hand, but as we as we learned at the weekend, there's no such thing as a guaranteed win. So it'll be very interesting. Like, we definitely still don't have our fate in our own hands, but it's certainly pushing us in the right directions.
It certainly is. And this weekend, we're going to lose Jack Carty yet again, and Dave Heffernan, who had one of his better games at the weekend in Lee. Like, how it really does look like Jack has become the Johnny Sexton, really, if you look at it from an Ireland perspective of this team, and that he needs to be on the field for Connacht to perform. Well,
he's not just the only one, because I think we're going to have 5 players possibly missing from the starting 15. When you take Bandiaki, Finlay Bellum and Mac Hansen, who are have been regulars on the Six Nations team this year, but then you add in Dave Heffernan and Jack Carty. And so other teams can absorb those absences. Connacht is not a team that can absorb 5 key players, in their squad. And I think that's the biggest difficulty for Connacht coming up to this weekend. As I said, they're a huge loss. I think it's wonderful to see Jack Carty back into that environment, and everyone says he is well deserving of being there. Whether he gets another opportunity, we don't know, or whether he's just that extra man on the pitch like himself and Dave Heffernan were, I think, for the first match. They were both there within the squad, but they didn't get a look in. But I suppose the fact is that the two players are up there, and it's important, I think, for everyone. For it's important for Connacht. It's important for Jack and Dave's, development and their recognition that they are close or thereabouts. It's just a pity, I think, that Jack came on for all of about less than a minute or something, and was thrust on there. I understand because of injury, rather than it wasn't a deliberate ploy, I think, to put him on at that particular time. But it was a bit unfortunate. But at the end of the day, he can put another tick by another international cap starting for Ireland. But I think it would be great for him to get an opportunity. But I guess it all just depends on injuries at this stage.
It certainly does. We'll talk about the Six Nations in a little while. We just want to finish off on that great win in the Scarlets, Danny. For me, one of the big things that came out of it was Leva Fafita red card aside, which should never have been a red card ever. The more you look at it, the more ludicrous that becomes. He was having a great game, or he had a great game, and the other player who really stepped up, and I know everyone thinks we signed him as a loose head, but he did play a tight head an awful lot of the time for Manawatu last season, was Titi Tuamaga, who absolutely rock solid in the scrum. I think the only scrum I saw him under any sort of pressure was the last scrum of the first half, when he was obviously a bit knackered, and we still managed to score a try off it.
Yeah, both of those guys really stepped up for us that time. I had my doubts over Leva Fafita after that Glasgow game, because he really just didn't seem interested. But definitely stepped up big time at the weekend. Like, he got through 15 tackles, he got through a serious amount of work. And TT Tuamanga, like his carrying, he just gave us that little bit of a punch. Just one thing I'd kind of noticed is that how bad the weather was over there. On the TV, it didn't actually look that bad, but then when they did eventually kind of flip up to the floodlights, you could see that, like, there was wind and rain, but you just couldn't see it. So you need those guys to really get stuck into the trenches and just make some hard yards and hard carries, and they definitely did that for us.
Okay, thanks, Danny. And so for of course, the biggest thing about the Scarlets match from a Connacht point of view, apart from the win and John Porte's 13 try in 50 matches, was that Kieran Marmion got to 200 caps. Like, that's an incredible achievement, isn't he?
Well, it is. I think what was quite special about it as well is that it was actually in Wales, where he grew up, and I know it was a great opportunity for his mum and obviously Liam, his brother, to be over there to witness it as well. Look, Kieran has been a huge servant, for Connacht from a young age. And it's just a pity he was playing with Connacht in some ways at the weekend rather than not for Ireland, because I do think he is still a player with a hell of a lot to give. I think that pretty much showed in Llanelli as well, because his speed at the ruck ball. I think he even stopped a try. One of the forwards, I think, got over the line, and he held that up and he stopped a try. he's a player with so much still to give, but I think he's probably got to the stage where maybe he is just enjoying himself more. He's maybe got that monkey off his back that whether is he going to play for Ireland? Is he not going to play for Ireland? He's probably accepted since that disastrous decision in the World Cup not to take him to the World Cup when he was so shocked at being usurped, by Luke McGrath. Nothing against Luke McGrath, but he was always, sort of like the number 2 in the team. And I think that was a real mental blow to him that it's taken a long time from which to probably recover. But he's got over that and he's shown his strength and he's very much at home in Connacht and he still has a huge role to play in Connacht, and it was great to see him and well deserved. Only one of 5 to reach 200 caps. Absolutely.
And another celebration at the weekend for a great friend of the podcast was James Crombie won the photographer of the year, press photographer of the year, for some amazing photographs that James puts out there, and some great stuff. He really is an amazing photographer. And if you just want to go and look up info James on Twitter and just look at some of the work that this man does. And it's not just sports, it's all over the place. He's an incredible talent, isn't he, Linley?
Well, he actually won, I think, the award, wasn't it, for his memoration? That was the main picture of the year. He just has amazing. He's obviously got a great eye, obviously, like most photographers, but he's just a very relaxed sort of person as well. And he's a very giving sort of person. And I think that is reflected actually in his work, that he has a lot to give as a person. And I think it's reflected in the pictures, the photographs that he takes. I mean, he's well established as the Connacht photographer, so to speak, because he's always at Connacht matches and he travels away as well, covering rugby all over the place. But I think it's just the fact that he has a really good attitude. He obviously loves his work. He has a great attitude. He works really a huge number of long hours. And of course, he's got a wife and 4 beautiful girls at home who he has, so he misses out on them, misses out with them quite a lot as a result of his work. But I think it's a well-deserved reward for 2 years in a row now, having won that award.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done, James. Good work on that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Six Nations, which is back this weekend. And it's always terrible. And I suppose that's one of the major impacts it's having on our game, is that Connacht are going to be kicking off at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because we're going to have Six Nations in the afternoon and then Ireland playing on Sunday. We're not expecting any sort of upset this weekend, are we, Danny? From an Irish point of view, obviously.
From an Irish point of view, no, you wouldn't. Just looking at it, like ourselves and France seem to be the 2 informed teams. I know with Scotland losing to Wales, it was a bit of a back and forth match, but the Italians, while they are improving, and you can see that with their 20s coming through, and they're starting to play a bit more rugby. I think it'll be more. It won't be a case of last 20 minutes and then we can start swatting Italy aside. I think it'd be more of a test than people think. Like that first match against the French, they did show that they can play. Yes, they still have issues, but they're definitely getting better. But I would say an Ireland win is expected at the weekend.
Yeah, I don't think there's not much else to say about that one, Linley, but I suppose the big game of the weekend really will be focusing on France. Their visit to Murrayfield, somewhere where it seems to be a bit of a graveyard for French teams. And looking at the weather forecast for Saturday, it's looking as though it's going to be pretty windy, pretty cold, and some 40-50% chance of rain. So it's not going to be somewhere where they'll enjoy playing rugby, but it should be a cracking match.
Well, it's always a great match between 2 Gallic foes, so to speak. Scotland are always sort of the most I wouldn't say fickle, but we don't sometimes know how they perform. Sometimes they can actually produce the goods and sometimes they can't. And in that way, maybe that is that Gallic influence, because France can be exactly the same, Yeah, and when you look at the Ireland-Italy game as well, look, we talk about, Dave Heffernan and Jack Carty being up there with the squad and not being available. This is the perfect opportunity to utilize those players. I mean, we are playing Italy. They're not expected to win. If we can't put Joey Carberry and Jack Carty out there on the pitch, then when is a better time? I don't think there's any better time. So I'd be very interested to see that the team that is selected to play Italy, because those players really have to start stepping up and taking over from those experienced players, because we just can't rely on Johnny Saxton. And I think that's pretty obvious this season that we can't. So now is the perfect time to do it.
I agree, especially with a trip to New Zealand in the summer coming up. So guys will definitely need a bit more experience. And then, of course, the other Six Nations game is always a bit of a fiery occasion when England take on Wales, and the return of Manu Tuilagi, which will obviously have an impact on Ireland, because Ireland will be taking on England after that. And I don't believe, I might be wrong, but I don't believe Ireland have ever beaten England when Tuilagi's on the field. I'll have to get Danny to check that one up for me at some point. Right, let's move on. Let's move on to the game that we're interested most at the weekend, which happens to be Connacht playing against the Stormers. And before we hear the thoughts of Danny and Linley, let's hear what the Stormers defence coach Norman Laker had to say, as well as their number 8, Akjiva Diamani, I hope I said that right, had to say about travelling to Ireland and the challenge that Connacht are going to pose.
I think that what they got right in Connacht the past few seasons is amazing. I do respect them for the type of rugby they play. I mean, everyone talks about the weather, how bad it is over there, but they still play a very nice attacking brand of rugby. And I think what Andy Friend has produced with the guys that he has is amazing. And I have a lot of respect for them. And I'm looking forward to the game.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like it's going to be a different game for us. You know, we actually prepared for that. And that's our mindset for the week, you know, to expect anything. It's going to rain. It's not going to be pleasant. You know, it's going to be like we're in the trenches, but some of us are from the trenches. So we are going to adapt to the conditions, and that's our mindset for the week. So based on what I've seen, I've never played against Connacht, but what I've seen, there's certain aspects where they're actually good at, and especially when they play at home, they're very confident. And there's also certain aspects where we feel like we can maybe target and try and get something out of. So it's obviously without showing our cards, we have a plan, and they also have a plan against us. So it just comes down to execute the plan better.
Okay, that's some very interesting stuff from Mr. Diamani when he talks about the fact that they're expecting the weather, which is looking pretty awful for the weekend, but maybe it mightn't be as bad as forecast with a bit of luck. But it's certainly not going to be the warmth and sunshine that they've been playing in down in South Africa. But they talk about going into the trenches, but they have a few players that are used to being in the trenches, and this team are the best team in South Africa at the moment, according to the table. They came up to the Northern Hemisphere in October, and they lost 2, drew 1 and won 1, and that happened they lost the first 2, then drew in Edinburgh, and then beat a Dragons team who had just beaten Connacht and were on a bit of a high. So they're also the best defensive team from South Africa. So it could be a real tough game, Linley.
Yeah, I think Andy Friend is preparing for a really tough battle. We know the South African teams coming up here aren't probably going to appreciate the weather. They play most of their rugby in good weather. I think Andy Friend said he was looking at the weather there recently, and they were playing rugby in sunshine, you know. So whatever weather, you know, Galway turns on for South African, I think Connacht always have that slight advantage, that they have the advantage of this is their home ground. And it'd be interesting, you know, I don't know how many points it's worth, but it's definitely worth some points. I think what it is going to come down to, and it is that balance between, you know, physicality and mental fortitude. And I think that this is going to be a real test of that, particularly up front. If we're missing a few key players, certainly physically wise, Connacht are really going to have to dig deep. And I think that is a real test of mental strength as well, to be able to do that and to not give up. But I think all the signs that we don't know what team the Stormers are going to bring, but obviously, look, we know where they're sitting. They're sitting 8th in the table. So they're only one place below Connacht, but they also have 2 games in hand. I think Andy was talking about last week that they needed 6 from 8. And I think he turned around, I think it was when Jared Butler, he said, came off the pitch, and he congratulated him. And I think Jared Butler turned around and said, well, now it's just 5 from 7. And I think that sums it up. I think that's the attitude. You know, they have to go out there. They know they need to win. They can't afford not to win. It's going to be a really, really exciting match, I think. And I hope that the weather plays its part.
So do I. Danny, who are we to look out for? Who should we be looking at? You know, they have a number of Springboks. Give us some details on who people should be looking out for in this Stormers team.
Well, they've got two in the front row of Stephen Kitchoff, and Demeni might not be in the current squad, but he has a few caps. You got Marvin Ori playing in the second row, Damien Willemse in the centre, Warwick Gallant at fullback, again, has a couple of caps, and Herschel Yanchis, who was on the bench last week. They've got a lot of experience. Like, a lot of these guys are World Cup winners. They can really hurt teams. So our guys are going to have to be on the top of their game. The other side of it, though, is that, looking at, because we obviously haven't played the Stormers before, I just went and looked back at, we've had 6 games at home against other South African teams, and we've won them all, scoring an average of 27 points to an average of 14 conceded. So we don't mind playing these guys.
Absolutely. And I had a quick look to see what their out half is Manny Libok, and he's only got a 67% or 68% kicking success rate this season. I'm not sure how well he's going to go in the Winley Sportsground. All right, so what are we talking about the weekend? Are we looking at a Connacht win then, Linley?
Yes, we have to. It's going to be extremely close. I think, Andy Friend has alluded to the fact that, yes, physically up front, but they've also got really good stars, a whole lot of sevens players apparently. So I think that's going to be very tricky defensively for Connacht as well. But I'm going to say that this is their first time over here.
And before you continue, they're only arriving on Wednesday, because it's only one game, so they're only coming on Wednesday, and they're flying. I think it's Cape Town to Joburg to Heathrow to Shannon. And they're only doing that on Wednesday, like only 2-3 days later, they're playing a match. So that's going to take a lot out of you. That's a lot of travel. I know it's, there's no major time zones, a couple of hours, but that's a hell of a lot of travel, and to be playing within a couple of dadays.
But it will also be, and I have to say, it's always going to be tricky for Connacht. Let's face it, if you're missing 5 Connacht key players, this is going to be a big ask for the likes of young Fitzgerald. To play that. Now, obviously, we know Tom Daly is back, so obviously Tom, I think, will be taking quite a bit of load off at number 12. One would expect him, to do so. But it is a big ask, for people turn around and say, oh, Connacht only have a few, they're only missing a few internationals. But the thing about Connacht is that those 5 international are actually key to Connacht's success. And so it is a huge, big ask. But at the same time, I think it's a really good opportunity at this stage of the competition for Connacht to actually really, really step up and say, this is who we are, and this is who we can be, and this is who we are going to be. And I think it's a huge mental challenge as much as a physical one for them. Okay, all right. And Danny, you'll be doing the stats for me, and the main part of the stats with different sizes, because all we ever hear about is how huge these South African guys are. I had a quick glance at it. They don't look quite as big as we would normally hear from South African sides. But your thoughts, who kind of going to win, or is it just that they need to win so they will win?
I definitely think it's more the second bit. Me, I love my stats, and I love to kind of go with trends and stuff like that. I do think it'll be a Connacht win. I would agree with Linley. I do think it's going to be closer than, say, past games against South African sides, but I believe that's more down to the weather that we'll be playing in. Like, some of those games were actually played in February or winter, in November and stuff, but from your helpful little weather notes, they all seem to be at least in a bit of decent weather, but it'll be interesting to see how the Stormers deal with the hill, so in the Sportsground, as well as the wind and the rain.
Yeah, nice reference back to Jake White when the Bulls arrived up, talking about the famous hill that, yes, the Sportsground is on top of a hill, but the pitch is flat, or relatively flat, very, very flat. There certainly isn't a slope on it the way
no, it's flat.
Jake White was talking about it.
It's a great pitch.
It is a great pitch.
It's just a great pitch. It's flat, and another chance to shout out to the groundskeepers in Connacht. They do a fantastic job. Keep that pitch in great nick. Be interesting to see what it'll be like next year when they finally decide to rip it up and put in a 4G.
Yeah, that's going to happen at the day after the Zebra game. They're going to be ripping her up and putting down the plastic pitch. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Okay, thanks, Linley. Thanks, Danny. And as usual, here's William.
We'll start with the results in the United Rugby Championship. On Friday, the 18th of February, Munster 34, Edinburgh 20. Cardiff versus Zebre was postponed due to weather issues in Wales. On Saturday, the 19th of February, Leinster 29, Ospreys 7. Glasgow 13, Benetton 3. Scarlets 23, Connacht 29. And on Sunday, the 20th of February, it finished Dragons 0, Ulster 12. Now, let's look ahead to fixtures this coming weekend. And in the United Rugby Championship, the South African teams are back in action. They're all up here in the Northern Hemisphere to play games. On Friday, the 25th of February, Zebre versus the Bulls with a 5:30 p.m. kick-off time. That's Irish time. And at 7:35 p.m, Leinster versus the Lions. On Saturday, the 26th of February, at 1 p.m, it's Connacht versus the Stormers. And at 3:05 p.m, it's Benetton versus the Sharks. Now, Six Nations Rugby is back in action this weekend as well. And we look first at the under-20 fixtures. All three games are on Friday evening, February the 25th. At 7 p.m, England versus Wales. At 8 p.m, two games, Ireland versus Italy and Scotland versus France. On Saturday, the 26th of February, in the Men's Six Nations, at 2:15 p.m, Scotland versus France. And at 4:45 p.m, England versus Wales. And Sunday, the 27th of February, at 3 p.m, Ireland versus Italy.
Loose, cut it loose. Break out or nothing changes. Side